biggest lesson is that sustainability is a mindset before it's a metric, right? The tools and the frameworks matter, right? Those models matter, but the real transformation happens when you start seeing every business decision as a choice, right? Who benefits, who's at risk, what kind of future you're building. And I learned that no one does this alone, right? Once you start thinking this way, then you find other people who are thinking this way. It becomes collaborative. And that's what
Right.
makes sustainability work better and more innovative. There's a lot of communities that form around this. One example I love is companies that re-engineer their products and supply chains for sustainability and then win on loyalty and price resilience. So, for example, Patagonia, right? That's a classic.
Right.
They do regenerative organic cotton, recycled inputs. I have a down jacket made out of, old fishing nets. They have repair programs, buy less, buy better messaging, and a fiercely loyal customer base. And because they were working with the environment, working directly in marginalized areas, because that's where mountains tend to be, and knowing, people that weren't, that were more disadvantaged, they had more of an empathy towards that and also towards not creating damage to the earth. So they started sourcing their products using that mindset, not having any goal of sustainability, just following their own hearts and values. But through that, they ended up becoming incredibly competitive in the very lucrative outdoor gear market and also transitioned into fashion.
Welcome to Vibrant Publishers podcast. Our guest for today is Dr. Tamara Stenn, who is an accomplished economist, sustainability strategist, and entrepreneurship expert with over 40 years of experience in business and academia. She's an associate professor of entrepreneurship at Suffolk University's Sawyer Business School and a Fulbright scholar. Dr. Sten is also the founder and CEO of the Sustainability Lens Game LLC, where she helps organizations build innovation and impact through applied learning and AI. Great. So let's start with the first question, which is, our topic for today is why sustainability is the smartest business strategy. And so I would like to start by asking you what, according to you, is the biggest misconception that businesses have about sustainability, and why is it costing them money?
Yeah, so with sustainability, I think the biggest misconception is that it's a nice to have, right? Sort of a corporate responsibility add-on instead of a core business strategy. When leaders see sustainability as extra, they tack it onto their marketing or philanthropy, and they kind of ignore the real choice points, the suppliers, the pricing, the hiring, the partnerships, the product design. Those are all the places where sustainability can really happen. And in the book, I show how every part of the business model canvas, which covers all of the different aspects of an organization, right? From its marketing to its customers to its internal processes, relationships, revenue generating, all of that is full of choice points. And when you overlook them, you miss chances to strengthen your brand, secure your supply chain, diversify revenue, deepen customer loyalty, and that's money left on the table. So when you treat sustainability more like a mindset, and that's what we show, is how do you set this up as a mindset that runs through operations, customers, and finance? It becomes a driver of resilience and growth and not a cost center. So it's kind of a way of being and doing instead of just an add-on.
That's right. If you could explain this with an example of a real life situation or a company
Sure.
that's done this.
Yeah. So the way the book works, we actually start with a lemonade stand. And the reason why I did that is because it's the most simple business that everybody can relate to, even children, right? Set up
Right.
a little lemonade stand on the corner, hand squeeze some lemons, add some sugar, sell it to customers. And we start off with that as our model of a viable business, right? You can make some money and serve a customer's need. And then we start putting on the layers of sustainability from there. And when you start looking at the supply chain, for example, you start looking at where you can make a difference. And what I tell my students is, and my clients is, as an entrepreneur, you have the most power of anybody because you get to make the decisions. And being responsible for everything you produce, all the way to the hands and the dirt that touch it last, is the most important part. So if you think about a lemon, lemonade, it comes from lemons. Lemons grow on trees, trees grow in the dirt. What kind of dirt are they growing in? Is that organic, right? Are those organic lemons? Is the dirt healthy? Who is picking those lemons? Are those people that are respected and paid a living wage? Are they given good work conditions and access to healthcare? So asking those questions as you're filling up your supply chain, filling it up with supplies that make sense and that benefit not just you, but also the people on the planet, automatically gives you a business that's more resilient. And then it gives you more selling points too, because now suddenly your lemonade is organic and fair trade and hand picked and grown from Sally Mae's farm, who you happen to know because you have a personal relationship with her because you're doing direct sales and direct buying. And it makes you more competitive and it makes your product more interesting. And it's a lot more fun because now you have this relationship with these people and you're more engaged in all the aspects of your business.
Yeah, that sounds interesting, and definitely gives a competitive edge to businesses. So, and also builds relations, an important point that you mentioned. So, yeah, uh, and uh, apart from the lemonade stand example, is there any particular company that has done such a, that has applied sustainability in the right way?
There's many companies that have done that. A lot of them, it's becoming mandates, right? Companies are being held responsible for the sustainable development goals. More the large international companies, where the European Union has committed to sustainability. But besides being having to do that, a lot of companies have benefited it just because it's something that they believe in. So one example I love is companies that re-engineer their products and supply chains for sustainability and then win on loyalty and price resilience. So for example, Patagonia, right? That's a classic.
Right.
They do regenerative organic cotton, recycled inputs. I have a down jacket made out of, old fishing nets. They have repair programs, buy less, buy better messaging, and a fiercely loyal customer base. They're in a super aggressive, competitive market. They started off as a gear company. Their thing was like crampons, like things that'll help you climb mountains more safely, that they would weld out of metal. That was where the company began. And then they started building the gear as they realized they needed better gear for their climbing. And so they were a very technically focused company. And because they were working with the environment, working directly in marginalized areas, because that's where mountains tend to be, and knowing, people that weren't, that were more disadvantaged, they had more of an empathy towards that and also towards not creating damage to the earth. So they started sourcing their products using that mindset, not having any goal of sustainability, just following their own hearts and values. But through that, they ended up becoming incredibly competitive in the very lucrative outdoor gear market and also transitioned into fashion, without that being their intention. But what makes them competitive in those markets is their commitment to the sustainability, having the innovatively developed materials and the ethical sourcing. So a lot of people who aren't out there climbing mountains are buying Patagonia because they like what it stands for. They believe in the brand. They know it's going to be good quality and they'll pay that extra money. And other brands that are similar don't have that degree of commitment from the customers. And, it's been able to keep Patagonia ahead and surviving in a very tough market.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, sustainability, the angle of sustainability is the winning factor for the company, but I feel their authenticity is also one of the factors for, people loving that company,
Mm.
right? So, being authentic, I feel, is another aspect that companies should adopt, right?
Well, that's a big thing that we see now, right? As the market, the employment market has gotten sort of shaken up a little bit after the pandemic. People are kind of rethinking their choices of work and rethinking what they demand from their jobs and what kind of workplace and values they want to be representing. And one of the other things I found when we're working with sustainability in a company is that people tend to stay in a company that reflects their values and a company that respects them as a worker. So that's another benefit, because turnover is really erosive for a company where they have to keep looking for talent and retraining them. And they have sort of a brain drain as people leave. So that was another benefit that I found when I was exploring sustainable companies, that they tend to have more longevity in their workforce, more committed workers.
Right, that's right. Well, thank you for sharing that example. Now let's dive a bit deeper into your book, The Profitable Code.
Hmm.
Your book introduces four P's. That's people, planet, profit, and purpose. So, which P do you think companies struggle with the most, and why?
The P's the P's that companies struggle with the most is purpose, right? People,
Hmm.
planet, and profit, they're pretty much now fairly well understood. They have pretty measurable policies, HR policies, carbon footprint, financials. There's software and organizations set up that help to measure the three P's. But purpose adds that uncomfortable question. Why are we doing this? What do we stand for besides quarterly earnings? Right. In the book, I argue that purpose is what keeps the other P's honest. Right. It shows how you avoid greenwashing, right? Just kind of throwing an organic product, an organic
Right.
yeah, product in just to make yourself look green without really being authentic or looking at even who's making that product, right? So you could have an organic cotton t-shirt that's made in a sweatshop, and then you can present yourself as green and not have good policies for your workers and not be thinking about, your energy use. And sometimes that can feel inauthentic. So by looking at that purpose, that kind of makes it become sort of permeate the whole business. And it makes sure that your sustainability actions aren't just cosmetic. And because it challenges identity and culture, it's the P that's most likely to be glossed over in a slide deck instead of lived in daily decisions, right? So it's a little bit more of a tough one because it's more cultural oriented. But when you get that purpose, then it kind of perks people up. They get excited for coming in and continuing to support, the mission that they're associated with.
Right. Interesting. Now, from the 40 years of experience that you've gathered, studied and built sustainable businesses, what's the single most transformative lesson that you've learned in this process?
Yeah, and so this process, I didn't go about starting sustainable companies, becoming a B Corp, becoming fair trade with intention. Okay, a little bit like Patagonia, I was following, what I felt was right. I kind of
Hmm.
entered into the world of sustainability when I was a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer living in Bolivia. And actually, even before that, I was in a sustainability mindset because I was living in Washington, D.C., in a marginalized neighborhood. And I participated in a lot in community development programs. So I had kind of a mindset for the underdog, a mindset for what can we do to benefit everybody. And that's what I found. The biggest lesson is that sustainability is a mindset before it's a metric, right? The tools and the frameworks matter, right? Those models matter, but the real transformation happens when you start seeing every business decision as a choice, right? Who benefits, who's at risk, what kind of future you're building. And I learned that no one does this alone, right? Once you start thinking this way, then you find other people who are thinking this way. It becomes collaborative. And that's what
Right.
makes sustainability work better and more innovative. There's a lot of communities that form around this. And so when you start combining the mindset with simple tools like the business model canvas, the four P's, the four lenses, which are all in the book, you stop asking, can we afford sustainability? You start thinking about how can we afford not to do this? So, for example, my students this semester have been presenting their final projects after using the Sustainable Good book for their entire semester. And what they're saying, what they learn the most as they're presenting their own businesses. I have my students develop a regular business like a lemonade stand, and then they add in the sustainability. So we backwards engineer it. And at the end, they said, wow, this has just changed the way we think about everything we buy and everything we do. And that's so true, because you have to think about where you have agency. So that's one of my transformative lessons, is the agency you have is the choices you make. And if you make mindful, well-informed choices that reflect your values, you're inadvertently starting to work into that sustainability mindset. So my businesses were fair trade, organic, B Corp, before I knew what fair trade, organic, B Corp was, right? Because I was already in that mindset. And then when I was introduced to the community, I said, oh, I'm already doing all these things. This is great. I'll join, because, that way we can all support each other. So that was my most transformative lesson. When I joined the B Corp, though, one of the things I noticed, I was very focused on my supply chain, and my USA employees, I wasn't so focused on. And I realized I needed to give them more benefits and include them more in the processes. So I did that.
Right. And you mentioned a few tools like business model canvas, then sustainability lenses. All of these tools, I'm sure they're in the book as well. What tool would you suggest for a beginner?
I would say for the beginner, work with the business model canvas. This is a fantastic program that was developed maybe 20 years ago as a master's thesis, and has just always been an open source material. And it's a fantastic resource because it works with design thinking. It's inclusive, it's visual, and it's free. So it's very easy to access online. There's many tutorials. It's incorporated into lots of different types of programs. And it's really the simplest, most visual way to see your whole enterprise on one page. So your customers, your value propositions, your resources, your cost, your revenue. And in the book, I use this as the foundation, and also in my game. I use this as the foundation, and then layer on the 4Ps, the 4 lenses, the sustainable development goals. Because once you can see your whole model in front of you, it's much easier to spot where sustainability can plug in. So looking at your sourcing, looking at your hiring, your pricing, your partnerships, your access. So for a beginner, filling out the business model canvas, even for a small idea, maybe a dog walking company, just something very simple. It's the quickest way to move from abstract values to concrete, actionable change. And I've taught the business model canvas, to illiterate, farmers, out in the most remote areas of the mountains. And, anybody can understand it. Because it is a visual model. It can be used with images. It doesn't have to be written, and it can be shared. So I've seen many organizations where they'll have it up on the wall big, and people can, many people, 20 people can cluster around it with sticky notes, and start making little suggestions and ideas. And everybody collectively can see, well, what's going on here. And sometimes they'll even use images, instead of writing out words, they'll draw a picture of what they're thinking of. And stick it on different areas of the business model canvas and see, well, what happens if we do this here? What happens if we do that there? And it's a very intuitive, fluid way of being able to collaboratively improve your business.
Yeah, right. Interesting. And uh, y- uh, so suppose an entrepreneur is using this tool, they're building, uh, they're starting to get into sustainability, but a lot of people worry that sustainability might get expensive for them. First of all, I want to know whether that is true, and if it is, then what's the most affordable or practical step that they can take?
Yeah, so sustainability is too expensive is probably the most misunderstood statement out there. Um, the most affordable first step is to map what you already do and then change the stories and relationships around it. So using the business model canvas helps you to identify one area that you can make a low cost shift, right? So maybe having a closer relationship with a supplier, a small inclusion initiative in hiring, looking for someone that might be a little non-traditional as a hire, having a simple buy one, give one pricing tweak, so your customers now are helping to contribute and share product with other people, or having a community partnership that costs time more than money. So maybe working with something like a time trade. All of these are ways that you're able to kind of improve the different ways that you're costing out your business, but not having it become like a big capital outlay. So you can start with like a one low cost experiment, measure its effect, and build from there. The other thing is looking at, are you going to be competing on quality or price, right? And there's always a trade-off there. And what I find too is when people purchase something that they know is going to last, they're going to spend a little bit more money on it. If they purchase something that they know is going to make a difference, they're going to spend a little more money on it. The thing that I also found out that was so surprising working with the B Corps is that many of these products are not more expensive than mainstream brand items, that might not have all the sustainability transparency with it. And when I looked at that as a researcher, the big difference was the marketing. A lot of these huge, huge companies that might, very well known brands that might not have the full transparency have a tremendous marketing budget. And that's what's driving up the cost of their products, where the fair trade products are pretty comparable in price. And even though they're paying more for the production, right? Their production costs are higher, the marketing costs are lower. So what the consumer gets is pretty much comparable in cost to what the consumer would get from a more well-known, heavily marketed, maybe not so sustainable brand.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. Now, coming to my last question, I want you to give a takeaway to the audience. If every listener took just one step towards the profitable good starting today,
Mhm.
what, according to you, should be that step?
So, and one of my students actually yesterday just presented on that, and she created a product where it's a set of glasses, and the glasses with the glasses on, you could look at anything, and the glasses would immediately scan it, ping to your phone what the sustainability footprint is on that product. So you have that knowledge right there, whether you want to engage in it or not. Is this a green, yellow, or red? And I think that's a really good, example right there, not to buy her glasses, but to have that level of awareness. Just choose
Mm.
one product or service that your business and just run through it with a sustainability checkup. Find out, where do the resources really come from? So maybe you could use something that's more local, something that's more reusable. So you want to think about where the sources come from, whose health and well-being is affected. So kind of looking at your staff, your community, your customers, how are people being paid? What kind of flexible time schedule do they have? Can they bring their kids or their dogs to work? Or what kind of supports do they need? What's one policy or practice you could change to make this fairer? So you could think about that, sort of the buy one, give one, or having, an opportunity for people to maybe work for food or work for a service. And then how can we change the way it's priced or distributed to include more people? So again, is there something you could barter or trade? For example, when I had my sweater company, I was part of a barter network that still exists in the United States. And, we barter our products at retail price. And, it's a really nice way of doing business because we're actually, saving money because our costs are the wholesale costs, the production costs, but they're valued at the retail value. And I'm able to, for example, trade sweaters for trade show booth equipment, or trade sweaters for a banner, right, for my business. So
Yeah.
all of these different things really make it more affordable for the business because I'm not using my cash flow, I'm using my barter. So that's what I would think, is just pick one product or service and just kind of run through it. Who's touching it, who's affected by it, who's benefiting by it, how is it accessible, how are people feeling as they're working with you in it, and seeing what you can change with that. So like commit to concrete change and then tell that story, right? And that's the most important thing, is to tell the story. Tell your team, tell your customers, tell your partners, this is a profitable good in action. This is a small focused step that improves impact and strengthens your business model. Because celebrating is really, really important. And that also gets other people involved, and it makes you feel good about the work that you're doing.
Wonderful. A wonderful end to the podcast as well. I mean, we are signing off with a very great note, and I urge the audience to check out the book, The Profitable Good, as well as the Sustainability Lens Game. It was I would say it was a new perspective that you've showed us today. Seeing business from a very different angle than what we've been seeing till now. So thank you so much, Dr. Tamara, that sharing your insights in the world of sustainability.
Thank you so much, Nakul. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today.